Did you catch any of the hype about the new reality show called I Want to Marry Harry? Well, it starts with 12 American girls who are all taken to this castle in the UK for a chance to marry Prince Harry. Only one problem. It's a different Harry with an English accent. It looks a lot like the prince, but is really an actor. And it just sounds like a whole lot of romantic disappointment coming our way. It turns out so is the show. It just got canceled after being on for only 4 weeks. But maybe it's only fitting, because one of the greatest romantic disappointments of all time was between Harry's mom and dad. Their tragic love story goes back 30 years, when a 32-year-old Prince Charles and a very demure and shy 19-year-old preschool teacher named Diana were married in front of the whole planet. It had all the makings of a storybook romance. You had this handsome prince, maybe, but work with me, who falls in love with this beautiful, fair maiden, who together they would eventually become the king and the queen. But if we'd been paying attention, we might have seen the disappointment coming. The engagement was announced at a press conference on the grounds of Balmoral Castle. Charles, in his characteristic kind of uptight fashion, began to explain how the engagement came about and gave all the details surrounding the upcoming royal nuptials. But throughout the whole press conference, the guy, if you watch it, he never shows any affection towards her. There's no kind of tenderness. There's no even kind of inclination to be near Lady Diana. And if you watch it, it just seems very stuffy, unromantic, an unloving kind of way to even announce this engagement. In fact, so much so that during this press conference, a reporter finally interrupts and says, "Are you two in love? Are you two in love?" Diana shyly answers, "Of course." And then Prince Charles chimes in and says, "Whatever love means." Whatever love means? Whatever love means? Don't you think poor Diana, and the rest of us should have seen the writing on the wall right then? Poor Diana ends up marrying this guy who, when asked, "Are you in love?" he says, "Of course." Whatever love means. Whatever love means. It's like the husband who asks, or the wife who asks her husband, "Darling, do you love me?" And he says, "Of course I love you. I married you, didn't I?" As if this grand gesture of getting married, the marriage ceremony itself, that kind of says it all. Or a little funnier, it's kind of like the wife who asks her husband, they've been married for years and years and years, and she kind of says, "Honey, do you love me?" And the husband says, "Of course I loved you. I told you once, if I change my mind, I'll let you know." Every guy, married or unmarried, knows. I'm not going to say they get it right. We don't always get it right. Okay, hear me. That's my disclaimer. We don't get it right, but we know that every woman needs to be more than just kind of have this grand gesture happen. They need to have more than just the fact that you completed this grand gesture of marriage. What every woman wants is to be romanced, to be listened to feel that they're genuinely, cherished, to know that the person that they married enjoys them and wants to spend time with them. Romanced. All right, so why am I saying all this during a series called Love Thy Neighborhood? Here's why, and here's my concern. In response to the challenge to love your neighbors, I'm afraid that we're going to make this kind of grand gesture saying, "Oh, I love my neighborhood. I love my neighborhood." But we aren't really prepared to romance our neighborhood, to spend time with our neighbors, to care for our neighbors in an intimate kind of way. And so in a way, we end up kind of responding with, "Oh, I love my neighborhood," whatever love means. I love my neighborhood. I rented an apartment. I bought a house here, didn't I? Isn't that why I moved here? Because I love this neighborhood. I said it when I moved in. If I change my mind, I'll let you know. My concern is that many of us aren't looking at loving our neighborhood like a love story at all. In fact, some of us are looking at it more like an action-adventure story.
In a world where nothing is as it seems, where what we've always known becomes what we've always feared, comes the story of one man who will stop at nothing to fight for everything.
Family, prepare for neighborhood re-entry.
the battle for survival begins. There's no place for fear. There's no room for mistakes. There's no time for doubt.
Go, go, get in the house.
They thought they had it all figured out.
We are here. Ready? Grill tools.
Check.
Charcoal.
Check.
We're gonna need more cookies.
But there was one thing they didn't plan on.
Dad.
Grill tools.
Dad.
Why don't we just go talk to them?
This summer, the unthinkable is about to happen. In the theatrical event of the year, Loving Thy Neighborhood. This time, it's personal.
So what do you think of the place? You know, you got the best food. She makes really good.
Throughout this series, we've been taking seriously the challenge that came from a person, whose name is synonymous with love. He never said whatever love means. This is a person who not only taught about love, but also lived a life that's just, universally considered the best example of how to live a life of love, and it's Jesus. And what Jesus does, he challenges us with these words, and he says this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second's like it: love your neighbor as yourself. Now, what if when Jesus told us to love our neighbors, he meant our actual, real life, next door neighbors? Charlie and Debbie, and Shri and Pinky, and Bill and Margaret. And not just our neighbor in kind of this broad terms that are, but our actual next door neighbors, so that our real neighbors don't get overlooked. See, I think we often hear, love your neighbor, and we kind of define it as, well, love everyone. Love everybody. Everybody's my neighbor. Jay Pathak, the author of The Art of Neighboring, he says this. It's really good. He says, the problem is, when we aim for everything, we hit nothing. So when we insist we're neighbors with everybody, often we end up being neighbors with nobody. So what if we took Jesus' challenge to heart and loved our actual neighbors? What if we decided that we would, and I'm going to replace the word love, what if we decided we would romance? We would actually romance our neighborhood. See, we can all say we love our neighbors, which basically means, you know what, I wish them well in their pursuits. That's what it is. I wish them well in their pursuits. But that's a rather kind of cold and distant, kind of a Prince Charles-like kind of love. It's a far different thing. A far, far different thing to actually romance your neighborhood. If you're to romance your neighborhood, you bring them to mind every day, several times a day. You can't wait to see them. You listen to them attentively. You have time for them. You make time for them. And you make them and what they want a priority in your life. Now, I have to be honest, it kind of creeps me out when I start thinking about Bill across the street and romancing him. But unless we start with kind of a different paradigm, unless we put loving our neighbors into a different kind of metaphor, we may never ever get what Jesus really challenges us actually to do. And so during this series, we've been using this tool right here, this neighbor map, to help us better love and romance our neighborhood. During the first week, during week number 1, we determined to know our neighbors' names, and I actually asked you to fill those in. I remember the first time I saw my wife, Sue. It was actually at a church, the church I grew up in, and she walked to the lobby area. My dad was the pastor of the church, and when I got home after church, the first thing I said to my dad was, "Hey, Dad, who was that blonde? What's her name?" The first step towards love is knowing a person's name. Then in week number 2, we asked you to get to know some things about your neighbors. It was a challenge really to take a romantic interest, get to know where they work, where they're from, what they like to do in their spare time. And as we learn these facts about our neighbors, we also start to learn more about kind of their stories. What are their ambitions? What are their dreams? What are their pains? We get to know their names, we get to know them. Well, as we conclude this series today, here's what I want to challenge you to do. To not just know their names, to not just know something about your neighbors, but to actually do this, to actually begin for you to take the initiative to create a neighborhood. I want you to see yourself taking the initiative to transform this group of people who live in close proximity actually into neighbors, into a neighborhood that could be everything God meant for it to be. There's actually a strategy for this that comes directly from Jesus himself. As he was prepared to travel from town to town to town and from neighborhood to neighborhood to actually spread this movement of love, he sent his disciples ahead of him to each of these towns and each of these neighborhoods to visit. And here's the instructions that he gave him. He gave him these instructions. It says, when you're entering into a house, first say, peace to this house. If someone who promotes peace is there, your peace will rest on them. If not, it will return to you. Stay there, eating and drinking, whatever they give you. Now, Jesus lays this out, and Luke records it. But as he lays out this really important strategy, it's an important strategy for both loving and creating a neighborhood. And the strategy has actually been called the person of peace strategy. When Jesus says someone who promotes peace, he's describing this person of peace. And what he wanted his disciples to actually come into this community, come into a neighborhood, and identify who's the person of peace in each town, each community, each neighborhood they visited. Now, here's some things that we're actually discovering. What we're actually discovering, even today, is that in every city, in every community, in every neighborhood, there still exist these people. And you can actually identify this kind of person of peace by two key characteristics. The first one is influence. These are the folks who have influence. People in the neighborhood, they know them. People in the neighborhood, they really like them and gravitate towards them. People in the neighborhood trust them. The first one's influence. The second way you can identify them is receptivity. These folks will almost be the first ones to initiate hospitality to you. They're receptive to you. They're receptive to your ideas and your beliefs, even if they don't share your beliefs. This person of peace strategy is really, what it really was for Jesus was a movement-building strategy. You see, Jesus had just these 12 disciples, just 12, barely a small group. But he knew that if this small group of followers could connect with insiders from the community, the people in the neighborhood who already had influence, that they could actually leverage that influence to bring Jesus' love, right? That's what he's about, love to the whole community and eventually to the whole country, maybe the whole world. So here's the thing. If you can identify and partner with the person of peace, let's say on your block, you can then leverage their influence to really impact and to bless your entire neighborhood. Have you ever heard of the book? There's a book by Malcolm Gladwell called The Tipping Point. It's a terrific book. He's a New York Times writer, and in this terrific book, he actually explains movements in a different way. He calls them, but it's very similar. He calls them tipping points. And the premise of the whole book is that little changes can have big effects. And a tipping point is this moment when an idea or kind of a trend crosses this threshold and it tips and then it can just spread like wildfire. It's really a book about how movements start. And Gladwell makes the point that social epidemics, which are movements, social epidemics need people to spread them. Just like an infection needs a mode of transmission to spread an illness, like through an animal or through food or through water. Social epidemics, social movements need people to spread them. Gladwell calls this the law of the few. And he explains that there's a very select group of people that are often responsible for this tipping point of almost all social movements. Gladwell gives them a name. He calls these people connectors. Connectors. It tells this fascinating story. He gives an example of Paul Revere. He says Paul Revere was a connector because the history tells us there were actually two people who got the word at the exactly same time from the same person that the British were coming. And the two folks were William Dawes and Paul Revere. Both went on a midnight ride to warn the people. But why did people respond to Revere while they didn't respond to Dawes? He makes the case that Paul Revere was well connected. He was a connector. People respected him. They listened to him. And so he knew who to tell, so they would end up telling other people who told everyone else. These connectors, in your neighborhood, are the people that Jesus calls the person of peace. And the whole point is that if you win their trust, then you win others' trust, the whole neighborhood's trust. Do you know who that person is on your block, or on your street, or in your neighborhood? Whether or not they share your faiths or beliefs, that person of peace, they will actually resonate. They'll resonate with your desire to love your neighborhood and make it a truly great neighborhood. They'll want that too. I remember it's now been 25 years ago when my wife Sue and my brother John and 4 friends from college, we all moved back to the Chicago area. We settled in Naperville, and our passion was to help people find their way back to God. The dream was to start a brand new church that would accomplish that. Now, at that point in time, I didn't understand this person of peace idea. What we did, though, is we started going door to door. Going door to door, just talking to people, asking people, what would they look for in a brand new church? And because we wanted to design a church just for them. We wanted to keep everything we could from the scriptures, from the Bible, but then other places that were outside of that we could kind of make adjustments and fit to their likings. We wanted to accomplish that. And so our team, actually, we knocked on over 5,000 doors during a 3-month period. One of the doors I knocked on was the home of Nick. Now, if you knew Nick, and I love Nick, Nick's this outgoing, party waiting to happen real estate developer. And we immediately hit it off. When I came to their house, Nick's wife invited me in. I went in, and I began to go through my survey questions, like we did hundreds or thousands of times before. After I finished, they continued asking questions. They asked questions about faith. They asked questions about family and my family and what we were doing. And then we began to ask questions, and we had to have a conversation about how we could make this community even better. The normal 3-minute survey turned into like a full hour-long conversation over coffee at their kitchen table. Nick and I formed a friendship that has now lasted more than 2 decades. I remember Nick came to our very first Christmas Eve service, before we ever had our first public service back in March of '89. He joined one of our first small groups. He connected me with other people who were also kind of on this search for God. I remember Nick getting baptized. What he did, he helped us transform a little startup into a church of thousands of people with multiple locations. We partnered together and started a not-for-profit called Institute for Community. He was the one who actually first got us thinking about reproducing sites of community all over Chicagoland. And it really wasn't until years later when I heard theologians describe this person of peace that I thought, you know what? Hey, that's Nick. Nick was that person for me of influence and receptivity. Influence and receptivity, the person of peace for me and for community. I mean, literally, think about it. The first time I came knocking on Nick's door, he invites me in. Here's a guy who's been a constant encouragement and a supporter of virtually everything that I've championed at Community. He's someone who's consistently been generous, with his time, with his resource, and his friendship. And for many of the last 25 years, we've had breakfast on Wednesday mornings and just kind of dream about how we could change the world and have fun doing it. Nick, what he did, he also, early on especially, opened up a relational doorways into his network of people. I remember him introducing me to bankers, business leaders, civic leaders, who I would have had to work years to have made the connection with to meet. Nick had a network of relationships and a depth of influence in Naperville that I never would have had when our church started 25 years ago. And by joining together with this person of peace, what happens is the Jesus mission got advanced in ways that never would have been possible if Nick hadn't been involved. So here is how you can go beyond just knowing your neighbors to creating a great neighborhood. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. First, I want to encourage you, identify that person of peace in your neighborhood. As you continue to get to know your neighbors, who's the person of influence on your street? Who's that's receptive to you and your ideas about what your neighborhood could be? So how do you go about identifying that person? Well, you know what I do? I go back to the blessed practices. Those blessed practices that we talk about all the time here at Community, they are so helpful. So if you're trying to identify this person of peace, here we go. Begin with prayer. Ask God to help you identify the person of peace. Ask God to lead you to the person who could partner with you to make this neighborhood all that God wants it to be. So begin with prayer and pay attention to the people that God begins to put into your path. L's for listen. Who do your neighbors talk about? Who seems to know everyone who lives on your block? Maybe you want to attend a neighborhood association meeting or maybe a block club meeting and listen, and you'll discover who the person is who's connected, who's passionate about the neighborhood. Then E for eat. If you think you might have identified the person of peace, invite that person over, invite their whole family over for a meal, or maybe just coffee. Because this is the person who loves to be connected. And so chances are they're going to jump at the opportunity and jump at the invitation to get together. E stands for eat. S, the first S stands for serve. The person of peace is likely someone who's already invested in some way in your neighborhood. Find out what you could do to help them. How could you serve alongside that person of peace and what they are already doing? And the last S stands for story. As you get to know this person of peace, share your story. Tell them what motivates you, God's love. Talk about the kind of place you'd like to see the neighborhood become. A person of peace, they're going to be energized by that vision. They're going to want to bring their influence and connections to help make your neighborhood a great neighborhood. So the first challenge is this: identify the person of peace in your neighborhood. Now, once you do, here's the second challenge. Sometime between now and Labor Day, what I want you and your person of peace, okay, you're going to partner together, is I want you to plan something great, okay, to create an even better neighborhood in the place where you live. And it's going to mean you romancing your neighborhood. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do, because what you need to do is you need to pray about it, you need to listen, and then determine. And a few things it might be. Maybe it's a block party, because you're going to finally get everybody together. So actually, there's a kind of a sense of community where you live. It might be some sort of service project or event that you all serve together, shoulder to shoulder. Maybe it's a 4th of July parade. Maybe it's a 4th of July picnic. Maybe it's an ice cream social. Chances are it might be something that you'd never think of maybe right now until you get alongside this person of peace and you listen to what's going on in your neighborhood. But as you pray and you listen, you partner with that person of peace, I'm telling you, you will know how to romance your neighborhood. And when you figure that out, you can make your neighborhood all that God meant for it to be. Maybe this was kind of God's timing to encourage all of you, but for the last couple of years, since we started using the blessed practices, one of the things that I've done consistently on a daily basis is praying for the people in my neighborhood, and specifically my next door neighbors. I brought my journal along here, just wanted to show you, because, every day, this is a couple days ago, just a few days ago, but every day you can see I write this kind of a column here where I have blessed, and I always have, there's 8 to 10 folks that I'm praying for. Here it is today. And specifically, one of them is actually my next door neighbors. And what's interesting, as you begin to pray for people, your neighbors, I think God supernaturally does something inside you. He allows your love to grow for them. You actually do. You find yourself thinking about them. And when you come back into the neighborhood, maybe after work or being gone, you look for opportunities to connect with them. Just like yesterday, I pulled in my driveway and it was time for dinner, but I saw Bill across the street. So I went over and talked to Bill for about 15 minutes, because you want to connect with them. You want to listen to them. When they're ill, you're concerned for them. You want to invite them over. And you really do. You begin to romance them. Well, it was on Monday. I got a text from my wife, Sue. And the text just simply said, and I pulled it up on my iPhone, and it said, the Earls, who are our next door neighbors. It says, the Earls, they called. And they want us to help them get a neighborhood barbecue on the calendar. Guess what? I think we found our person of peace. Here's the challenge for every one of us, is to partner with a person of peace to bless your neighborhood in some big way this summer before Labor Day, okay? Before Labor Day. That's your goal. So that we can make our neighborhoods all that God meant for them to be. But here's the deal. It starts with you and me actually loving our neighbors and loving our neighborhood. And it can't be, oh, I love my neighborhood. Whatever love means. So let me honestly ask you and answer this. Do you really love your neighborhood? Are you in love with your neighborhood? It's a critical question, because living out what we've been talking about in this series is only going to happen if the answer is kind of this gigantic, romantic yes with enthusiasm. If the answer is yes, then we have to follow up with a willingness to kind of romance them, to romance our neighborhood. I'm telling you, there are people in your neighborhood who are passionate. And I think God places this inside of us. They want a great neighborhood. They want to experience that. People long to live with that, the kind of community we've been talking about during this series. So identify who those folks are. Partner with those folks and watch God do things you never dreamed could happen. This summer could be the summer where God's dream for your neighborhood becomes a reality.